At 1:45 a.m., my best friend sent me a photo. My fiancée was half naked in a club, grinding on a stranger. Then I zoomed in, and I found out who this guy was. I was dead asleep when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. At first, I figured it was some spam notification or one of those late-night group chat memes that could wait until morning. But then I saw the name on the screen, Mason, my best friend since high school. Not a guy who sends 2 a.m. messages unless it's serious. When I opened it, there was no text, just one photo, and that photo was enough to turn the air in my bedroom cold. It was a packed club, the kind with neon strips snaking across the ceiling, laser lights cutting through the haze. People pressed together on the dance floor. But my eyes locked instantly on 2 figures in the center. My fiancée Julia, wearing a barely there top, her body flush against a man's, moving like she didn't have a wedding 3 weeks away. My stomach dropped. Not in the maybe I'm misunderstanding this way. No, there was nothing to misunderstand. Before I even realized it, my fingers were zooming in on the image. That's when I saw it. On the man's wrist, just under the rolled-up sleeve, was a small black ink tattoo of a compass rose. I'd seen that exact tattoo before. It wasn't random. Months earlier, at our engagement party, one of the guests, a guy Julia claimed she barely knew, a friend of a friend, had reached across the table to grab a bottle of wine. That same tattoo had caught my eye then, too. He'd even joked about getting it on a drunken dare during a backpacking trip. His name was Blake. And now Blake was in some dark club at 1:45 a.m., with his hands all over the woman I'd been planning to marry. I didn't answer Mason's message. I didn't send any follow-up questions. My brain had already clicked over into a different mode. Something cold, sharp, and mechanical. The kind of state where you don't weigh pros and cons. You just act. I threw on jeans and a hoodie, shoved my wallet into my pocket, and grabbed my car keys. No shoes for subtlety, no slow gathering of my thoughts. My only plan was to find that club, find them, and make sure Blake's night didn't end the way he thought it would. On the way out, I texted Mason just one thing. Where? Within seconds, he replied with the name of the club. I'd been there once before. Overpriced drinks, DJs who thought volume made up for talent, the kind of place people go to be seen. Perfect for someone like Blake, who liked an audience. I was in my car within 2 minutes, engine roaring to life. The streets were nearly empty at that hour, save for the occasional rideshare car or lone pedestrian. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight enough that my knuckles ached. Every red light felt like an insult. I kept the photo open on my phone at the passenger's seat, replaying it in my mind, letting the details etch themselves into my memory. And the more I stared at it, the more it dug in. The way Julia's head was tilted back, laughing, the way Blake's hand was wrapped around her hip, the look in his eyes like he'd already won something. The club was on the far side of town, in one of those districts where bars stacked on top of each other compete for noise dominance. I pulled up about 20 minutes later, parking a block away to avoid anyone clocking my car. As soon as I got out, I could hear the bass thudding through the night air. There was a line of people outside, half of them shivering in clothes designed for Instagram, not weather. A couple of bouncers in black coats stood by the door, scanning IDs. I knew there was no way I'd wait. Every minute felt like handing them more time together. I pulled a folded 50 from my wallet, approached one of the bouncers, and leaned in just enough to make it seem casual. I left my wallet inside earlier. I lied, flashing the bill as I spoke. The bouncer's eyes flicked down to the money, then back up to me. A silent calculation. He took the bill, gave me a slight nod, and moved the rope. The sound hit me like a wall as soon as I stepped inside. Pounding bass, distorted vocals, the low roar of voices layered over the music. It smelled like sweat, perfume, and spilt liquor. Lights strobed across the crowd in dizzying bursts. I scanned the room in sections, moving toward the bar first. My pulse was hammering, but my head felt unnervingly clear, like I was mapping out the place for a mission. No sign of them there. Then I caught sight of her. Julia. She was on the far side of the dance floor, back to me, moving in time with the beat. Her hair, loose and tumbling down her back, caught the light in flashes. And pressed against her, almost chest to chest, was Blake. His hands were on her waist, his mouth close enough to speak into her ear. She threw her head back, laughing at something he said. The crowd pulsed around them, a moving wall of strangers. They looked like they were in their own bubble, like the rest of the world didn't exist. I didn't move immediately. I stayed just inside the shadow of a structural pillar, watching. Not because I was unsure. No, I'd seen enough already. But because part of me wanted to see them comfortable for just a few seconds longer before I blew the night apart. Blake leaned down and said something else. Julia's hands slid up his shoulders. She didn't look around, didn't check her phone, didn't seem to care who saw them. I stepped out from behind the pillar, weaving through the crowd, keeping my eyes locked on them. The people between us shifted with the beat, some holding drinks high, others lost in their own moments. But with each step, I was closer. 10 feet away. Blake still hadn't seen me. Julia was facing slightly to the side now, her profile visible. 5 feet. I could hear fragments of their voices over the music now, her laughing, him saying something I couldn't make out. I stopped just short of them, letting my presence sink in for a heartbeat before the moment broke. Julia's eyes flicked toward me and froze. The smile on her face collapsed instantly, replaced by something wide-eyed and pale. Blake turned to see what she was looking at. His grin faltered when he recognized me. That was all I needed. But instead of swinging right there, I stepped back half a pace and let the tension hang in the air for a moment longer. The music kept going, the lights kept flashing, but in that pocket of space, it felt like everything slowed. Blake's hand loosened on her waist. She took a small step back from him, but he didn't let go entirely. It was the last moment either of them would have to enjoy the night before it became something entirely different. The moment hung there for only a second before it snapped. Blake smirked, not a nervous, caught-off-guard kind of smirk, but the kind that said he thought this was funny, that he had already decided I wasn't going to do anything. That was his first mistake. I stepped forward, closing the gap. Julia's lips were moving, saying something I couldn't hear over the music, but it didn't matter. I wasn't here for explanations. My eyes locked on Blake, and my hand shot out, shoving him hard in the chest. He stumbled back into a group of dancers, spilling someone's drink. People shouted in protest, but I didn't care. Blake came back at me fast, trying to push me in return. The second his hands touched me, I let my right fist swing, the knuckles connecting clean with his jaw. The sound wasn't loud over the music, but I felt it all the way up my arm. His head snapped to the side, and he staggered again. Julia screamed. Not the kind of scream you hear in danger. The kind you hear when someone's perfect little world shatters in public. She grabbed my arm, trying to pull me away from him, but I shook her off. Blake straightened, his face twisting in anger, and came at me with a swing of his own. It was sloppy, off balance, and I ducked under it, driving my shoulder into his ribs. The crowd was reacting now. Some people were shouting at us to stop, others were cheering like this was free entertainment. I caught a glimpse of glowing phone screens, people filming. Perfect. If Julia wanted to act like nothing happened, she could explain this to the whole internet. Blake tried to grab my hoodie, but I ripped free and sent another punch into his stomach. He doubled over, wheezing, but before I could land a third, a heavy arm clamped around my chest from behind. One of the bouncers. He hauled me back, feet scraping against the sticky floor, while another bouncer stepped between me and Blake. The guy was coughing, holding his side, glaring at me over the other man's shoulder. Julia was talking to him, wide-eyed, but he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me like he was promising something for later. The first bouncer kept dragging me backward toward the entrance. My feet were moving, but my head was turned over my shoulder, shouting over the music, not words for Julia to hear privately, but loud enough for everyone nearby to catch. That she was my fiancée, that our wedding was in 3 weeks, that she was grinding on another man like I didn't exist. The ripple that went through the crowd wasn't just because of the volume. People love a scandal. Some gasped, others started whispering to each other, passing the information along like it was breaking news. A few actually booed her when she tried to follow us, and she froze under the attention. By the time we reached the entrance, 2 more bouncers had joined in, forming a wall between me and the rest of the club. One of them shoved the door open, the cold night air rushing in, and the first guy pushed me out into it. The door slammed shut behind me. I stood there for a moment on the sidewalk, breathing hard, the muffled thump of the bass still in my chest. People in line were staring, trying to piece together what just happened. A couple of them asked if I was okay, but I didn't answer. My heart was still pounding too fast to string together words. I took a few steps away from the entrance, leaning against the corner of the building. That was when the thought hit me. This wasn't over. Blake was still inside, probably smirking to himself, thinking he'd won just because I'd been dragged out. Julia was probably feeding him some line about me, overreacting. No, not tonight. I moved along the side of the building, down a narrow alley that smelled like stale beer and garbage, toward the back. That's where the staff and VIPs usually slipped out. A single security light buzzed overhead, casting a weak yellow glow. There were 2 dumpsters and a few stacks of empty crates. I picked a spot where I could see the back door, but stay out of the direct light. Minutes dragged by. A couple of bartenders came out for a smoke, laughing about something, then went back in. A girl in a glittery dress stumbled out with her heels in her hands, called someone on her phone, then disappeared into the street. I kept my eyes on that door, my pulse steadying, but my muscles still tight. Finally, maybe 20 minutes later, it opened again, and there they were. Julia came out first, glancing around quickly like she didn't want to be seen. Blake followed right behind her, one hand on her lower back, the other holding his phone. He was talking, smiling at something on the screen. They didn't see me. They turned left, heading toward the parking lot that wrapped around the side of the building. I moved along the shadows, following just far enough to keep them in sight. My shoes crunched lightly on gravel, but the music and street noise covered it. When they reached a black sports coupe parked near the back, Blake unlocked it with a chirp. He opened the passenger door for Julia like he was some kind of gentleman. I stayed in the shadows, eyes scanning for cameras or security. None in sight. That was when I noticed something glinting near the wheel, a keychain. It was familiar. During the fight inside, when I'd shoved him, his keys must have fallen out. And when the bouncers dragged me, they must have gotten kicked across the floor, right to where I'd been standing for a moment before they hauled me outside. In all the chaos, I'd pocketed them without even thinking. I pulled the keys out now, feeling their weight in my hand. Blake was still on the far side of the car, talking to Julia. Without a sound, I stepped forward, tossed the keys high, and let them land with a loud clack on the flat roof of the club building. They'd be up there until someone with a ladder came along, which wouldn't be tonight. Blake froze, looking around. He hadn't seen me yet. Julia frowned, asking him what was wrong. He muttered something and started scanning the ground. That's when I stepped out of the shadows. His face went from confusion to rage in a heartbeat. Julia's eyes widened again, her mouth forming words that didn't make it to my ears. Blake took a step toward me, his shoulders squared, but he wasn't ready for the speed I came at him with. My fist connected with his cheekbone before he could raise his hands. He staggered back against the car, cursing. Julia tried to get between us, but he shoved her aside and came at me full force. We crashed into the hood, the metal denting under the impact. His hands grabbed at my hoodie, trying to choke me, but I ripped free and landed another punch to his gut. The sound of shouting was growing louder now, not just Julia, but other voices. A group of clubgoers had wandered out and were watching, some egging us on, others yelling for someone to break it up. I heard one guy yell, "Call the cops." Blake swung again, catching me on the jaw this time. My vision flashed white for a second, but it just made me angrier. I drove my shoulder into him, forcing him back against the driver's side door. He tried to knee me, but I grabbed his leg and shoved him sideways. Julia was shouting that I was crazy, that I'd followed them, like some stalker. That word made a few of the onlookers gasp. Perfect. Let her try to spin it now. Half the crowd had probably seen her with him inside. The distant wail of sirens cut through the noise. Someone had definitely called them. Blake heard it too, because he tried to break away, pushing me back toward the lot's edge. I let him go, but only because I had other plans for when the police arrived. The sirens were still distant, maybe a block or two away, but they were closing fast. I stepped back toward the shadows, circling behind a row of cars. Blake was still pacing by his coupe, looking between me and the street like he couldn't decide whether to run or finish what we'd started. Julia hovered near him, clearly panicked, but trying not to show it. I ducked between two parked sedans until I was crouched near his car. The night air was cold enough that my breath was visible in little bursts, and each one felt like fuel. I could already see the deep dent in the hood from when I'd slammed him into it, and it gave me an idea. Without hesitation, I slid the box cutter from my pocket, a habit from work, not something I'd carried for this moment, and crouched low. The hiss of rubber tearing was almost drowned out by the bass still thumping from the club. One tire went flat in seconds. I moved to the next, slicing deep, feeling the air rush past my knuckles. By the time Blake realized I wasn't standing in front of him anymore, I was working on the third tire. His shout carried across the lot. "You!" He didn't finish. He just charged. I stood up fast, the box cutter still in my grip. He slowed for half a second when he saw it, but not enough to stop. I stepped into him, shoulder first, driving the air from his lungs. He stumbled back against the trunk, clutching his ribs. The sound of the third tire deflating must have hit him then, because he looked over the car, saw the damage, and went red. That was when he threw the first wild punch of this round, grazing my cheekbone. It stung, but I didn't give him time to follow up. I slammed him against the side of the car, pinning him there with my forearm across his chest. Julia screamed for someone to help, but most of the crowd from inside the club had now gathered in the lot, forming a loose circle. Some were holding their phones high, recording every second. Others were shouting things like, "Knock him out," or "Cops are coming, man." I shoved Blake back, letting him come at me again. When he did, I sidestepped and swept his legs, sending him down hard onto the pavement. His head bounced off the asphalt with a hollow thunk. He rolled onto his side, groaning, but when I stepped toward him, he lashed out with a kick. It caught me in the shin, but I barely felt it. The sirens were louder now, maybe 30 seconds away. A deep part of me wanted to keep going until he couldn't stand up, but I also knew I wasn't interested in being hauled off with him. I stepped back, flipping the box cutter closed and sliding it into my pocket. Blake scrambled to his knees, using the car for leverage. Julia was next to him now, her hands fluttering like she wanted to help, but didn't know where to touch him without making it worse. I didn't say a word. I just pointed at the shredded tires and the dented hood. His face twisted into a promise, not of fear, but of payback. That was when the first police car pulled into the lot, lights flashing red and blue across the cars. 2 officers stepped out, hands already up in the universal stop gesture. "Back it up," one barked, looking at me first. I raised my hands, stepping away from the coupe. Blake started shouting over him, pointing at me, claiming I'd attacked them for no reason, and came out of nowhere. Julia backed him up instantly, nodding along, but her voice was high and shaky. The second officer moved to her, asking for her version. She repeated Blake's words almost word for word, which only made her sound rehearsed. The first officer turned to me. "Your side." I didn't give him a long speech. I told him I'd gotten a message from a friend that my fiancée was at the club with another man. I walked in, saw them together, and things got physical. I didn't deny the fight. Lying would only make me look worse. But I also made sure to gesture toward the crowd. Because here's the thing. Half of them had their phones out, and I knew at least some had caught Blake throwing punches first in the parking lot. One guy stepped forward, some random clubgoer in a leather jacket, and said loud enough for both officers to hear, "That dude threw the first punch outside." I saw it. Another girl chimed in. "Yeah, and she was all over him inside." Everyone saw it. She tilted her head toward Julia, who looked like she wanted to disappear. The officers exchanged a look. The first one asked Blake to hold still while he took down his ID. Blake was still breathing hard, probably realizing the witnesses weren't helping his case. Julia crossed her arms, shifting her weight from one leg to the other, eyes darting everywhere but at me. Then came the moment that turned things further against them. Mason arrived. I hadn't texted him since asking for the club's name, but apparently he'd been close enough to see the flashing lights and come over. He walked straight to the officers, told them he was the one who'd sent me the photo, and that it clearly showed Julia and Blake in a way no engaged couple should be acting. One of the officers asked to see it, and Mason handed over his phone without hesitation. The photo didn't show the fight, but it did show intent, and with the witness statements, it painted a pretty clear picture. Still, they had to do their job. The first officer told me I'd likely face a misdemeanor assault charge for the punch inside the club, since security cameras there would catch it. Blake might face the same for the parking lot, depending on how the footage and statements lined up. They took both of our IDs, ran them, and called in a brief report. Then they separated us, me on one side of the lot with Mason, Blake and Julia on the other. The crowd had mostly dispersed now, though a few lingered, hoping for more drama. As they finished taking notes, one of the officers came back to me. "Here's the deal," he said. "You're free to go tonight, but you'll be contacted about a court date. Stay away from them in the meantime." I agreed, taking back my ID. Blake shouted something after me as I walked away, something about how I'd regret it. I didn't even look back. Julia's voice followed his, calling my name like she thought I'd stop. I didn't. When Mason and I reached my car, he exhaled hard, shaking his head. "That was insane," he muttered. "Half the club saw it. It's going to be everywhere by morning." I didn't doubt it. In fact, I hoped for it. We drove away as the police were still talking to Blake and Julia, the club lights fading in the rearview. My knuckles ached, my jaw throbbed, and my shin was starting to swell where he'd kicked me. But none of that mattered. The night wasn't over, not for them, and not for me. Because as far as I was concerned, this was just round one. By the time I got home that night, the adrenaline had started wearing off, and my body was reminding me just how much punishment I'd taken. My jaw was tender, my knuckles were split, and every muscle in my shoulders felt like a rope pulled too tight. I crashed on the couch instead of my bed. It wasn't about avoiding the bedroom. I just wanted the first thing I saw in the morning to be my phone, not the empty space where Julia would have been if this were any other night. Mason had stayed for a while, mostly in silence, occasionally muttering that I'd probably blown up the internet. He wasn't wrong. At 9 a.m., my phone started buzzing nonstop. Notifications from group chats, DMs from people I barely talked to, even a couple of missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. When I finally opened my social media, I understood why. There it was, a shaky, vertical video posted by some random clubgoer. It started in the middle of the dance floor fight, with me shoving Blake and landing that first punch. The crowd's reaction was loud enough to drown out most of the music. The camera followed as the bouncers dragged me out, catching Julia in the background trying to explain herself to a group of wide-eyed onlookers. But the real gem was the second video, clearly shot by someone in the parking lot. This one caught the moment Blake spotted his shredded tires, the confrontation that followed, and me slamming him into the hood. The police arrival was the finale, complete with flashing lights and Blake shouting like a man who thought volume could rewrite reality. Both videos had thousands of views by mid-morning, with comment sections that read like a live execution. Imagine your wedding's in 3 weeks, and you're out here doing this. Dude handled that like a champ. Fiancée and the guy caught lacking. Hope she enjoys explaining this to her parents. By noon, Julia's name was trending locally. Not because she was some influencer, just because people love watching a public train wreck. That was when the first twist hit. I got a DM from a woman I didn't know. Her profile picture showed her with a man in a suit. The man was Blake. The message was short and sharp. We need to talk. Call me. My first reaction was suspicion. Maybe this was a trap. But I clicked her profile anyway, scrolling through photos of her and Blake on vacations, at dinner parties, celebrating anniversaries. Then I saw their wedding photo. Blake wasn't just my fiancé's side fling. He was married. I called her. She answered on the first ring. Her voice was calm, almost cold. She'd seen the videos. She wanted to know how long I'd known about Blake and Julia. I told her the truth, that I'd found out last night, and acted immediately. She sighed, like she'd been waiting for something like this to happen. Then she dropped the bomb. She had proof that Julia had been sending Blake money. Not small amounts, either, transfers that added up to a few thousand over the past 2 months. Apparently, Blake had been feeding her a story about being between jobs and needing help until a big deal came through. Julia had been funneling him cash from our joint account. I felt my jaw tighten. The betrayal had just gone from personal to financial. Blake's wife said she was filing for divorce immediately and that she was sending the transfer receipts to my email so I could do whatever I wanted with them. She also mentioned that Blake's employer, a mid-sized real estate firm, might want to see the videos. Not because they cared about morality, but because public brawls and viral humiliation weren't great for business. I thanked her, told her I'd be in touch, and hung up. Within an hour, I'd forwarded the receipts to Julia's father and attached the parking lot video for good measure. I didn't add commentary. The images spoke for themselves. He didn't reply right away, but about an hour later, I got a short text. It's handled. Handled was putting it mildly. By evening, I started hearing from mutual friends that Julia had been fired from her marketing job. The official reason was conduct affecting company image, but it was clear they didn't want her name linked to viral videos of infidelity and police lights. Blake didn't get off any easier. His wife sent the fight video to his boss. The same day, he was placed on leave pending review, which was HR speak for don't bother coming back. The best part? Someone in the comments section had tagged both Julia's and Blake's workplaces under the videos. The internet had done what it always does, connected dots and poured gasoline on the fire. 2 days later, Julia showed up at my apartment. She didn't knock softly or wait politely. She pounded on the door like she had a right to be there. I opened it just enough to stand in the doorway. She looked like she hadn't slept, makeup smeared, hair tied back messily. She started with accusations, saying I'd ruined her life, that the videos were humiliating, that she couldn't believe I'd make it public. I didn't even respond to the hypocrisy. I just told her I knew about the money. That shut her up. She tried to spin it, said Blake needed help, that I wouldn't understand. But when I told her I'd already sent the receipts to her father, her face drained of color. She muttered something about me being vindictive and stormed off. That was the last time I saw her in person. The court summons came a week later. I had to appear for a misdemeanor assault hearing for the punch inside the club. Mason testified on my behalf, as did 2 of the bystanders who'd filmed the parking lot fight. Blake tried to push for more, but the fact that he'd been involved in 2 separate physical altercations that night, one of them initiated by him, didn't help his case. The judge handed me a small fine and a warning to keep my hands to myself. Blake's case for the parking lot scuffle was dismissed entirely after the witnesses contradicted his story. For the cost of a few $100s, I'd ended an engagement, exposed 2 liars, and lit a match under both of their reputations. Money well spent. By the end of the month, Blake's wife had moved out, taking half of everything. Julia had moved back in with her parents. She tried to reach out through mutual friends, but the consensus was that her family didn't want her talking to me at all. Her father, in particular, apparently hadn't spoken more than a few words to her since the night I sent the evidence. As for the videos, they lived on. Every so often, I'd see them resurface in compilation clips about cheaters getting caught or wildest nights out. The comments were always the same: disbelief, mockery, the occasional applause for my clean right hook. Mason and I grabbed drinks a few weeks after everything settled. He raised his glass and said, "You know, most guys just break up and move on." I shrugged. Most guys didn't get a 1:45 a.m. photo like that. In the end, I didn't need to chase revenge any further. It had already snowballed beyond anything I could have planned. I just stepped out of the way and let gravity do the rest. Julia lost her job. Blake lost his marriage and career. And me? I walked away with my head high, my bank account protected, and a crystal clear reminder of why ignoring that photo would have been the worst mistake of my life. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.